Okay, welcome back everyone to these author interviews that we're doing on the Semi-Sages of the Pages channel. I'm Teresa and I'm here with Kathryn Diaz, and we're promoting Queens in Wonderland, our newest anthology. So Kathryn is an English teacher, and fun fact, she has a cat named Potato, which is really fun. And her story for Queens of Wonderland is Alice the Terrible. And this is a fascinating, whimsical story that starts off on a chessboard and really kind of moves the characters around. But a lot of it is about becoming who one is. And that's a really common theme throughout this anthology. But this is done in such a fantasy way that I adored so much. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Teresa. That means a lot.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So, what drew you to writing in the Wonderland universe?
I noticed the call for submissions, and what I was immediately taken back to was actually my brief, like 2010 Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland era. Like I had all like the wristbands, the t-shirts, the Avril Lavigne single on repeat. And mostly I felt inspired to was like, oh, could I do that? I'm not sure. And so I went back to the text, and on one very appropriately summer day, I went to the park and I binged the whole thing. The first book, I went to the library and I binged the second book the very next day. And so much like Alice in the novels, I fell into this, tumbled into this summer dream of the possibilities that the story contained. I was most taken by what is made so clear in the first book is that this is Alice's dream, that all the strange things we see, all of the danger, all of the adventures, and all of the very odd and funny plays with power in the ways in which she breaks rules or terrorizes small critters are all manifestations of herself. Whereas in the Looking Glass world, the sort of wistful joke is that who dreamed it? Whose story is this? And so I loved the idea of using a world as an expression of the self, and also the ways those worlds are sometimes called into question or hidden from us, which gave me the idea of this dual world story where we spend like half our time in one place that is maybe not representative of ourselves, but rather an idea of being given how we should be, and the other half in a world that does represent ourselves, and how sometimes truly frightening that can be to have your inner self on display around you where you can't hide from it.
Hmm. And yeah, that's, oh my gosh, you put that together so well. And your story, it's so complex and so nuanced. And the more I read it, the more I just fell in love with it because it does have all of these really fun layers to it. So it's beautifully, beautifully done. And I love, yeah, you explained it so well.
Thank you
So
so
that's
much.
awesome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Was there anything about being a part of this anthology that drew you to it, or was it the Wonderland that drew you to it?
Well, the other exciting thing, of course, so um, I'm from Texas, which causes some people some surprise because they have an idea of like what a Texan sounds like or looks like. So I am spent the first 25 years of my life in Texas in the 90s and early 2000s, where I think the only like queer icons I had for quite a minute was like Kurt from Glee.
Oh,
And so I had this own youth of sort of having a hidden self that I had some ignorance of. And so a lot of my young adult and new adult life has been not just discovering myself in the present, but looking back and retroactively rediscovering foreshocks and hints of that self always being present, just unbeknownst to me through past interests. And so it was very personally satisfying to go back to this piece of my youth that was at the time a very small part, but is now, because of how I spent this summer on this labor of love and dreaming up my own Wonderland, that because I made it is also now somewhat can be read as an extension of myself, the way it is for Alice. Queering this part of me that will now always be a part of me, and that has now not just reclaimed that tiny, like, tween Tim Burton era and the era in which I read the books before bed with my parents out loud and by myself and had these puzzling questions and my own discomforts with it. Now, all of that gets to be part of my queer history. And what I love so much about this anthology is the opportunity it offers other writers to either discover, rediscover, claim, or reclaim this narrative that has so much possibility for self-determination, so much possibility for imagining new ways of being and doing and living that gratifies both like our current selves and perhaps like past child versions of ourselves.
Oh, that's said so well. And that's such an Alice thing too, because Alice, especially Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, are about identity, about her discovering who she is. And everyone's asking, "Who are you?" And she's like, "I don't know." And so you tied that together so well. That was really well done. Because we do change, and that we should change. Who we are when we're 15 should be very different than who we are at 25, should be very different than who we are at 35. We do need to change over time. Otherwise, what's the point? And I think that's one thing as authors that we recognize in that our characters have to change. So, yeah, I think that's good. That's very cool. Good, good. Was there anything about writing the story that you found hard or challenging?
Um, I, well, I wouldn't say hard because the joy of writing for me is the challenges. I think the hardest thing, or the thing that took the longest to uncover, was what Alice's big transformation is from the very
Mm.
beginning. I have my process note. I filled this whole notebook over the summer in the making of this story. I
Oh my
started
gosh.
sometime in, let's see, June 10th, and I went nonstop all the way into like July 20th, and I took a break for a summer holiday to see some family, and then I went right back at it. And so all of this is all of that. And so from the very beginning, I had a sense of what the story would be to me. I'm tracking themes, questions like who am I, who are you, wordplay, thresholds, like doors and symbols of transformation play a role in my
Hmm.
story. And so I had the basic pieces from the beginning. I think when I first questioned for myself is dark academia, Alice? And the answer ended up being yes. Not
Hmm.
entirely yes, but also kind of yes. But what I didn't know was what Alice would find. I knew she would find something, and I had some false starts and ideas at what that revelation would be. But it wasn't until a third or fourth draft I was talking to a colleague of mine about the story. And I was like, oh my God, I think it's this. But that's like, is that okay? Can I do that? I don't know. And they were like, well, the only way to find out, right? And I was like, yes, I just have to go for it and find out. Which was scary because I'd never written anything quite like that before, being ominous for spoilers. So you'll read. And so I had to go down the hole, as it were, and commit to the moment and then go back and find the foreshocks and the sort of trail I had subconsciously laid for myself for that revelation and heighten those moments so that it delivers itself well. And writing is so wonderful like that, how you can plot and plan so much. You can fill a notebook with drafts and ideas and revisions and still find the seed of it, the core of it, the thing that ends up making it all come together much, much further down the line. But I think that's also the beauty of it, is the element that we have to surprise ourselves so that we can hopefully surprise our readers in satisfying ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was more challenging because being like 4 drafts in and still not feeling like it's come together can be very scary. And so I feel very lucky
Yeah.
that it did.
It can be. I mean, I think a lot of our viewers will understand that feeling of, oh, come on, why can't I pull these threads together? I know there's a story there. I just can't quite get it tight enough. So, yeah, I cannot believe you filled a notebook all the way up. You're a huge, you must be a really tight plotter as you go.
Actually, no.
Oh,
I've I used to be, but I found that I do need a for my own sort of like personality type. I need some kind of plan. I have um like very regimented like word goals. Like we are going to sit down and we are not leaving till we have like 500 words, 600 words minimum. You're not getting up until you get those words. And then the summer for my job, that's a quite a pleasurable regiment to fall into. But between each draft, the story changed considerably. At one point, there was a version where it was all in one world. There was a version where a whole character like existed, and the draft where they didn't exist, and they came back in a much smaller role. And so, rolling with the punches and having to trust the almost like not just the intuition, but the intuition around the story, the seedling story, the inspiration that you first got, and trusting that and my own base of knowledge, my own base of knowledge. I know how stories work. I have read a lot, I have written a lot. I know how stories work. I will be able to put it together, even if I don't know what that way is yet. And so it's tight in that I have a very robust base of knowledge that I can rely upon. I teach, I write, I know so many things about plot conventions and tropes and genre. And I read Alice in various forms many times over. I was quite a student about it. When I was stuck for ideas, I was like, well, let's get the Norton copy and see what the essays have to say about this. But in the writing, it was very intuitive, and I had to trust my Alice and my Wonderland to lead me down the right path.
oh, awesome. And it did. It did. It's such an amazing story. So before we get to doing a reading, where can our viewers find out more information about you?
Well, I am on Instagram at Batcat Books, and I'm also on TikTok, newly also at Batcat Books, where I talk about what I'm reading, things are writing, upcoming projects, and also offer writing advice, reviews, and prompts for fellow writers who can need to grab a quick, like 5 minute creative burst.
Fun. Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Very cool. All right, we ready to move into the reading?
Yes, I have
Okay,
my documents.
perfect. All right, I can't wait.
Alice had abandoned her family, her mother, and her sister, Ferret, when she'd stepped through the great mirror gates of Looking Glass World to become someone else. She had been accepted to Looking Glass University, told her work had great promise, and that if she crossed every square on her degree path as she was told, she would be Alice the Great, Alice the Better, Alice who was admired and adored. Perhaps Alice had furnished that last title herself, but it prickled with such hope on her skin when she thought it. She couldn't let it go. Unfortunately, to get to class on time, Alice needed to abandon her hope, and the red and white square that tiled the world knew she hadn't yet. Today, when she stepped out of her room to attend the Red Queen seminar, the white square twisted under her feet, and she found herself in the rose garden on the other side of the campus instead. Get out, you terrible beast! You aren't supposed to be here! A handlebud shrieked. I have to be somewhere, Alice replied, a little hurt. And this is where I am. Aren't you supposed to be where you are? The handle huffed with disdain. If you don't have the leaves to know finding your place is your responsibility, there's nothing I have to say about it. Alice ignored him and took out her notebook for a quick sketch. He would make a funny picture with his leaves tossing haughtily over his stem. You might feel a little out of place if you had come a long way to start your great work too, she said. I am my greatest work, the handle retorted. Alice hummed with mock seriousness, but behind her notebook, she couldn't help but wonder. She took great pains to make sure her work wasn't her, but something better. When she worked on Wonderland, she scraped the wildness out of her words and sanded them into smooth, pleasing wit, something she had never managed with herself. They had to be what Alice wasn't to be embraced in ways she wouldn't. But should she try harder with herself? What if she misunderstood the Red Queen's theorems on artistic perfection? What if she could never get anyone to like or understand Wonderland until she had cut herself down by the same rules and organized herself as neatly as Looking Glass World? What if all of her work was worthless until she had learned every agonizing useful thing? And just then, all the squares around her snapped into one red tiled slide. And before she could bid the handle rose goodbye, she was rolling into the Red Queen's instructional parlor like a bowling ball, stopping only when Her Majesty stepped on her with a red slippered foot.
Oh, I love it. The imagery is just so fantastic in this story. Now, I'm going to ask the handlebud, where did that come from?
I knew I wanted a flower, and I knew I wanted it to be a boy flower. And so I just looked up rose names, and there is such a thing as a handle bud named after the composer Handel. I think in my head when I first conceived of him, he was this very like Schitt's Creek David type figure. Like imagined his leaves like those tiny, like skinny scarves over his shoulder. And I was like, yes, if I could just have like David Levy in one as like a flower to sass Alice and introduce some themes, wouldn't that be the most perfect thing?
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's wonderful. So that wraps up this interview
All
with
right.
Kathryn Diaz. If you're watching this, the Queens in Wonderland is available either for pre-order or in all of the places, or it's available for sale in all of the places. If you're interested in autographed copies, just send us an email at www.nobadbookspress.com. You can go ahead and go to that website and buy the books from there. So thank you so much for coming and doing
Thank
this.
you so much for having me. This is a really wonderful piece, and I can't wait to see the whole thing come together.
It's such a good anthology. It's fantastic. So, all right. Thanks everybody. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.